It's an incredible pleasure for me to have a chat to Will Fleeson today. Will was a keynote speaker at our 2025 ISSID conference in Vienna, and now I've got an opportunity to have a chat to Will about his life and his talk. So Will, thank you so much for coming along to do a talk today, and perhaps you'd just like to introduce yourself.
Hi. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for inviting me to do this. I'm excited to talk with you again. I just met you at the conference and I really enjoyed talking to you. So all the more pleasure to have more chances to talk. Yeah. So I'm a personality psychologist at Wake Forest University. I've been there quite a while.
Excellent. So how many years have you worked in academia for?
Well, let's see. I started graduate school in a year known as 1987, which is actual year. Did actually happen, even though it's pretty long ago. And I got my first professor job in 1996 at Wake Forest University. And it took me a few years in graduate school, and then I had a long postdoc.
That's incredible. So you've had this amazingly fabulous and successful career and a long career in academia. What's kept you going? What's your passion?
Well, yeah, I guess three things, really, four things maybe. Good question. So one is I've been thinking a lot about what was my passion actually. So I had a sabbatical, so that's one of the things I was thinking about. Number one, I felt like when I was younger that I needed to have a career that was going to do something that was not going to make the problem worse and that possibly make the problem better. And the problem being in particular the fact that I think there's a lot of pain caused by people exploiting each other or being cruel to each other through political or similar types of reasons. Just a lot of people suffering throughout the world. And I didn't want to do a career that was going to be indifferent to that. I wanted to try to do a career that would help that. And I tried to figure out all the different careers I could do. The long answer. Should I keep going? So I tried to think it through a lot of careers I could do. I thought, the most direct things would be like, Doctors Without Borders, or maybe joining some kind of political action group or some kind of NGO or something like that. And those are fantastic, and maybe I should have done those routes. But I got worried that once you solve the problem as an NGO, that you're working on, then you leave, the problem's going to come right back because the people are doing it for the same reasons they've always been doing it. There's going to be people come in and exploit each other for the same reasons that they've always been doing it. Yeah, sure, you can stop them for a while, but as soon as you're done with your work, they just start over again. So that felt to me frustrating, and I wanted to have a more permanent solution. I thought politics too, you can make these great principles like a great society or something like that, and then sooner or later someone's going to come along and undo it all because they think that it was all bad. So I was trying to think of something that would be more permanent. And I thought research might be that answer, that if we can really figure out people's personalities and why they do things, we might be able to figure out why they exploit each other and why they're cruel to each other. And that might help us to reduce some of that on a more lasting long-term basis. That's the goal. Obviously, research doesn't directly, my findings on personality don't do a direct bit of good for people who are suffering from political persecution, for example. So the goal is in the long run, by understanding how personality works, we'll be able to solve those problems. I don't get to see any positive effects of my work, which is kind of demotivating. And maybe I'm deluding myself that it won't ever have any positive effects. That's where I'm at. That's one reason. Second reason is I love trying to figure things out. I just can't stand doing anything other than teaching people and talking to people about ideas. Those are my favorite things to do in the world. And this is the job for that. I remember the day when I was like, I love talking to people about ideas and I love teaching, and there's a job that you do both of those things. So I was like, that was when I knew I'd be a professor. So in addition to helping others, it also is a job that fits my skills and desires. And then third reason is I really like the people that I work with at Wake Forest. I really enjoy them. And I just, it's a great place to work. Wake Forest is a really wonderful place to work. And then fourth, where you can really, spend time talking to people about ideas and enjoy teaching. And then the fourth reason is that is a good place to work per se. So these two reasons are very similar to each other, but the first one was that Wake Forest has good people in it that I like to be around. And the second one is that the structures at Wake Forest are enjoyable to work at too. 4 answers. You tell me if you want a shorter one next time.
No, I think I think it's really important to understand why people do things that they do, and I think you've explained that extremely well. So can you tell me a little bit about the research that you have conducted over the lifetime of your career?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, I started, most of my work has been on trying to understand what a personality trait is. We know the names of the personality traits. We have a pretty good idea of, that there are 5 or 6 of them, and, they're named something like extroversion, agreeableness, and conscientiousness, emotional stability, and openness to experience, and honesty, humility. And we know how the traits are kind of organized. Interestingly, know what each one of them is. We don't know what it means to say someone is extroverted, right? We can say that about someone. Oh, that person's extroverted, that person's introverted, but we don't really know what we're saying about them. We think we know, sort of. We're like, well, yeah, they're like sociable and they're generous, but those are just more adjectives. We don't know why they're that way, how often they act that way, how consistently they act that way, the causes of that, what would make it change internally, what's the essence in them that's making them be extroverted or introverted. Those are things we didn't know. So I've spent most of my time trying to figure those things out. And I've taken a very motivational and social cognitive approach to that, because I think people think about things, and I think that they have goals, and that they're very purposive and agentic. And so they're trying to do stuff that they think is going to work. And that's why they act in the ways they do. So I think the inside of traits is something like beliefs and goals. I've also worked quite a bit on using the concept of borderline personality disorder to try to understand better what a trait is, because borderline personality disorder is kind of like a trait. Some people would say it is a trait, something like a trait at least. And I wanted people with borderline personality disorder suffer tremendously. It's a terrible, terrible thing to have to live with. And I wanted to try to help understand them better so that the treatments could be developed that are better. And I also wanted to try to understand traits better. So it was a nice merging. So I spent a good 10 years working on that. And then similarly, I'm really interested in morality. Why are some people moral and others not? And when I say moral, I don't mean particular version of morality. I mean more that some people want to do good in their lives and want to do good to others and think, and that's a high priority to them. And for others, it's not as high a priority. And I'm very curious about why that is. So I've also spent about 15 years studying what is so you could, let me back up for a second. So you could think of being good in different ways, like being honest or being compassionate or being generous, as also traits. So they might also be traits. They might not be. There's something like traits. So I also wanted to figure out, well, what's internal factors and what's the internal nature of a trait like compassion or generosity that makes people be that way. So there's one thread of trying to figure out what the internal causes of things for people, and then there's the different places, just normal traits, borderline personality disorder, and morality.
Has this all come together to become whole trait theory? And can you perhaps then tell me a bit about it?
Yeah. So whole trait theory is the current version of what I think is the best chance of being what a trait is like, what the internal side of a trait is. There's evidence supporting it. And so what whole trait theory says, that in a real simple, bringing it down in a real simple level, there's 2 parts to traits. So when you say someone has a trait, you're actually saying 2 things about them, not just one thing. And one of the things you're saying about them is that they act in ways that are extroverted. I'll come back to that in a minute, because that's a little more complicated than that. At first, that sounds very simple and obvious. And then the second thing you're saying is that they have something inside them that makes them act extroverted. Again, seems a little simple and obvious. The problem is that throughout the history of personality psychologists have been debating each other like crazy over which of those is the real trait. Which one's the real one? Is it the way they act, or the thing inside them that causes them to act that way? And I'm saying, like, in Aranda Jayawickrama is my close colleague who spent a lot of time working on this theory with me as well. And then we've also had some other collaborators who've been really helpful with this. And what we say is that there's really good arguments for both sides of that. There's really good arguments that the way someone acts is their trait. And there's really good arguments for the fact that what's inside them causing them to act that way is their real trait. So really, to try to decide between them is a little silly. That really what a trait is it's both of those things. It's the whole of those 2 things working together that makes the trait, rather than either one of them alone. That's the simplest outline of the theory. There's a lot more detail, a lot more weeds to it that we can get into if, in the parts that are interesting to you.
Yeah, and whole trait theory also brings in the idea that there's some change in personality which can be expected.
Yeah, absolutely. So whole trait theory is fundamentally a change-oriented theory of personality, that personality traits are fundamentally changing. They're created out of change, and then they continue to develop out of change. And why is that? There's a couple of things. One, at the behavioral level, it turns out that people are much more variable in what personality trait they express than we realize. So people act, for example, extroverted and introverted and in between all the time, much more regularly than we thought they were. And that's true. Extroverts act extroverted a lot of the time, and they act introverted a lot of the time, and they act sort of in the middle most of the time. Introverts act extroverted a lot of the time, and they act introverted a lot of the time, and they act somewhere in the middle most of the time. So both, no matter what your trait is, you pretty much are varying across the whole spectrum of extroversion and introversion behaviors most of the time. Most people are varying quite a bit. And so that's kind of surprising. There's so much change already from moment to moment. That's kind of our normal way of being. And you can think about it. If you're in a lecture hall, you're going to be a lot more introverted, quiet and talkative and passive. And if you're giving a lecture, you're going to be a lot more extroverted, talkative and loud and assertive and active. Even if your personalities are quite the opposite of that. Even if the person in the audience is the extrovert and the professor is secretly the introvert. So it makes sense. And so that's change is already built in to that. Then we were thinking, well, if that's the way people are naturally, they're naturally changing so much from moment to moment, why are they doing that? Is it just randomness? Like people are just crazy and random? Well, no, because you act introverted in a lecture hall and you act extroverted when you're the teacher. So it seems like it makes sense the way people act. They act reasonably. They change their behavior reasonably. They change their behavior because the situation isn't recommending that, or because they have different goals. When you're listening in a lecture hall, your goal is to get that information. And so how do you get information? You be quiet and you be passive. When you're in the teacher, your goal is to convey information to people. How do you convey information? You be talkative and you be assertive and you be dominant and active. So the point is that people change all the time and they do it for reason, right? They think through what they want to accomplish and what's the best way to accomplish it. That's why they express the personality traits they have. And so here, if that's the cause, so the first part of change is people are already changing from moment to moment. The second part is if that's the cause, if the reason why people are changing is because they are acting in ways that they think make sense to accomplish the goals they have, well, then it's easy to change the way you're going to act generally by changing what goals you have or your beliefs about the best way to change those accomplish those goals is. So if you change those things, you're going to change your personality as well. So it makes change a lot more meaningful in a trait because it makes it make sense. It's about trying to get what you want to get out of your life in a way that makes sense to you.
Yeah, this is what you talked about at the conference in Vienna in 2025 in the ISSID conference, and it was all about change. Do you think talking about change, in contrast to talking about the stability of personality, is a way of reconciling the different disciplines that are interested in how people are different from each other, but historically maybe haven't always gotten along with each other?
That's right. Absolutely. It's well put. Yeah. So there's been a lot of tension about whether personality is stable or changes over the decades, so much so that even for a while, the field believed there was no such thing as personality. The people didn't differ from each other at all, as you know. And so one of the things we're trying to do with whole trait theory is say, again, both sides of this debate had some reasonable points. They also had some seriously wrong points. If we take the reasonable points out, discard the wrong points, we can actually begin to see a picture of traits that's a little bit more complex, where people do change, but they also are stable. And so you have both things. And that's kind of the way people are, right? They're extremely complicated and they're able to change to some extent, but not extremely. They don't change left and right. So you can see, some of your people that you're close to, they change some over the years, but they don't change radically from one day to the next, and they don't even change radically over much longer periods of time either. So there's some change and there's that possibility of change, but there's also quite a bit of stability. Yeah, the complexity is something that I just have a lot of faith and respect in the complexity of people, that they're a lot more complicated than we like from a scientific point of view.
I think that's very well put. And I think we really should congratulate you on such a big contribution to the field with regard to this kind of big picture thinking and the way you have integrated within person change, between person differences, and also how you might create change in personality. So there's a whole lot of contribution there, which I think is going to really take the field forward in the future. So thank you very much for spending some time there. Perhaps we could just finish up with a simple question. What would you say to be able to inspire the next generation of academics who are coming into the discipline?
Sure. I guess my top advice would be to follow your nose. So I'll tell you a story about that. That took 15 years, not to tell, fortunately. So in 1989, I went to graduate school and I wanted to do a study where I looked at how the big five personality changes from moment to moment, and it's due to your goals. Because my advisor was interested in goals, but she was from the camp that really disliked stable personality. And she was like, no, there will never be a big five measure in any study in my lab. So I had to wait. So I was like, shoot, I won't be able to do this during graduate school. And so then I went to my postdoc, and I went to my German advisor at the postdoc, and I said, I want to do this study where I look at how big five varies from moment to moment. And it's because of your goals. And this was in the mid 90s. And he said, no one finds that interesting. No one will find that interesting. So I couldn't do it for my 4-year-long postdoc. And then finally I got to be an assistant professor in the first year I did these studies. And they got, I put them into a paper. I worked really hard on them. They got accepted at JPSP, and people were very interested. And finally, I got to do what I wanted because I thought it was interesting, and I stuck with that. Every time I try to do what I think other people will find interesting, my work isn't as good. But when I try to do what I think is interesting, my work comes out better. And so just try to figure out what you're interested in and do research on that. Your work will come out better.
Yeah, it seems a shame that universities these days seem to spend so much time trying to tell us what to do instead of having the faith in letting us do what we think we should do.
That's right. Absolutely.
But, Will, thank you so much for spending some time with me today, talking about you, your career, some of the big picture ideas that you're working on, and just talking in general about life, the universe, and everything. So thank you so much for your time.
It was great talking to you. Thank you.